In my travels across the multiverse, I stopped in a world not too different from ours, but there was one pretty crucial difference pop culturally speaking. George Lucas got an earlier start on making the Star Wars prequels in this world, aiming to release The Phantom Menace in 1993 on the 10th anniversary of Return of the Jedi. The version I watched in a theatrical re-release was actually called The Saga Begins, but it is, by and large, quite similar to The Phantom Menace, at least enough that I was able to recognize it as such pretty early in the movie. But the devil is in the details, and this other world, there were a lot of details. For one, all the way back in 1977, Lucas envisioned Star Wars as something he could help birth, but other creative figures could help raise. And so while Lucas helped with the story and art production, he handed the directorial chair over to Joe Johnston, fresh off The Rocketeer. Lucas had worked with Johnston on the original trilogy, and he must have had a good eye for his ability to bring that human element into the fantastical, as he did with Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and Jumanji in our world. I should also point out, while the story of The Saga Begins is like 80% the same as the story of The Phantom Menace, that 20% difference can be attributed to an earlier draft of the story you can read about at the Secret History of Star Wars site, link in the description. A few key differences. Obi-Wan is already a full-on Jedi Knight, and the first half of the movie he's on his own. No Qui-Gon until we get to Coruscant. Jar Jar is more naive and childlike than outright stupid, and in the fight scenes his victory is on purpose, not accidental, or the way of the Force, or what have you. And while I didn't get around to watching episode 2 and 3 in this world, it seems like these prequels were going to lean more into a love triangle being not the sole reason, but a factor in the fall of Anakin, which is kind of something that seems to have been on George Lucas's mind in our world, even though that wasn't really set up beforehand. The casting, I'm sure this is what you are excited about, is pretty wild. Anakin Skywalker is played by one Edward Furlong, one of the big examples I can see where Johnston was able to exert a little influence on the story. Phantom Menace gives us a precociously adorable Anakin who, the layman who has never heard of Star Wars, could never see turning evil, but Johnston wanted to seed hints of the darkness even in the very beginning, and thought Furlong's punk attitude in Terminator 2 was a good place to start with that. And he also probably justified that this would be a good reason why the Jedi Council would not want to train Anakin, while in the Phantom Menace we got, it's a little bit more questionable why they don't want to do that. Padme was played by Kate Beckinsale, just a little older than Edward Furlong, but not so much older that my mom is still accusing Padme of robbing the cradle to this day. Not a whole lot of difference between her Padme and Portman's, though we get to see her sneaking out and doing a little light rebellion against the invaders before she and the decoy are rescued by Obi-Wan, to showcase her proactive nature a little better. Padme's captain of the guard, Tanaka, is played by Ken Foree, who, from what I've heard, stuck with the series until episode 3. In our world, Captain Typho replaced Tanaka in 2 and 3, but on this world, Foree stuck with it, which unfortunately means he didn't go on to play Mr. Rockmore in Kenan and Kel. A shame, but he seemed to enjoy his career path on this world. Obi-Wan was played by Jason Isaacs, believe it or not. I usually look at Isaacs and almost always say, oh yeah, you're a bad guy. And he did lend a little bit of an edge to Obi-Wan, which makes sense based on what Obi-Wan said in Empire Strikes Back. But I was surprised how well he worked as the White Hat, who's not a rookie, but isn't quite the jaded pro either. Like I said, Qui-Gon doesn't show up until much later, but when he does, Malcolm McDowell kills it. He's another actor who I don't usually see as a good guy per se, but I was surprised he was able to bring an almost grandfatherly quality to his performance in his brief interactions with Anakin and Padme, while still prepared to bring the thunder in the finale when he returns to Otapu, the name of Naboo in this version of the movie. One piece of casting that perplexed me was that of Anakin's mother, Shmi, played by Toni Basil. Yes, the Toni Basil of Hey Mickey, You're So Fine, You Blow My Mind, Hey Mickey fame. It's weird and distracting, but she's not a terrible actress. She did work with Lucas in American Graffiti, so that might have had something to do with her presence here. And even though she isn't who I would have cast, she doesn't ruin the movie either. Jar Jar is played by a young Doug Jones, who unfortunately did not go on to play what's-his-name in Hocus Pocus, but he got an early start in his career leaning more into the physicality of this role, while Nancy Cartwright lent her childlike voice for Jar Jar. She was surprisingly good. You wouldn't think so if all you know her for is Bart Simpson, but never once did I say, oh, Bart Simpson is about to fight some battle droids. No, she makes Jar Jar seem like a child, but not annoying. One kind of big difference here, since Jar Jar isn't so clumsy that he was banished on pain of death from the Gungan city, his method of traveling with Obi-Wan is a tad different. Just like in The Phantom Menace, the Jedi Knight saves Jar Jar, and the Gungans take this life-debt thing pretty seriously, so Jar Jar takes Obi-Wan to the palace where Jar Jar was never banished. When Boss Nass finds out Obi-Wan saved Jar Jar, he says, okay, yeah, technically the quickest way to get to that big city that's being invaded is to go through the planet's core. In the movie, it feels more like a we won't kill you, but we will send you to your death situation. But here, it's more of a our hands are tied, he owes you a life debt and you're in a hurry, so this is the way. Everyone else's favorite Gungan is played by Marlon Brando, who, he's Marlon Brando. From what I've heard before I moved on to another world, he didn't want to learn his lines. He was always suggesting ways his lines could be condensed or removed. He probably only had a couple of days of shooting, but still made things a little more difficult than necessary. In his defense, I guess, CGI wasn't quite where it would be just a half a decade later, as it was Jurassic Park that really told movie people, hey, we can do this, and as that came out the same year as this movie, they weren't doing nearly as much CGI stuff as they might have if they had waited a year or two later to make this movie. So Jar Jar, Boss Nass, what few other Gungans we see, they're all practically portrayed. So I get Brando not really being into the hours of makeup, but I'm sure he was into the big fat paycheck, so maybe he could have just shut up. Ian McDiarmid still plays Palpatine here, not too different from how he plays him in The Phantom Menace of our world. While Darth Maul is played by Syrian he's played by Mance Rayder from Game of Thrones, a little mouthier than Ray Park or Peter Serafinowicz. He brings menace to the part, but unfortunately, his more bantery version of Maul makes him seem a little less threatening than the Maul of The Phantom Menace. And while my big critique of the Sith of the movies of our world is that we never know why they do what they do, what do you want revenge for? That critique is no less valid in The Saga Begins, even with a more talkative Maul. Even with the changes I mentioned, if you squint, it still looks an awful lot like The Phantom Menace we know. Obi-Wan tries to negotiate tax stuff, crashes, meets Jar Jar, meets Padme, goes to Tatooine, meets Anakin, goes to Coruscant, we meet Qui-Gon, we go back to Utapu, Qui-Gon dies, Maul dies, the end. Overall, I liked it, which is saying something since I've kind of given up on my love of Star Wars. But this one pleasantly surprised me. If only I wasn't so greedy with my multiverse traveling tech, I'd let other people go to this world and watch this version of the movie. But I am, so you can't. But you can listen to me talk about this and other stuff I did in a multiverse some other time in the future. Until then, have a great rest of your day. Catch you later.